Vaheguru, 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 Vaheguru.
You spoke earlier about when the Brits took over, they wanted to dilute our religion.
Yeah.
And some of the stories I hear over the British Raj is all about how our Barneys got diluted, and they started off with part of the Dasam Granth and some of our Barney as well. And is there more to that, or is there specific Barney that you touched upon?
Definitely the Dasam Granth Sahib became less visible in all the Gurdwara. Yeah, like all of our Taqs meetings, if you look at the whole history, whenever there were British people that came over to look at how the Akal Takht was working, there was always two Granths there. Guru Gobind, the Dasam Pashadi Granth and Sri Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. And also, bear in mind that even now in Hazur Sahib, when they have Diru Prakash of Dasam Granth Sahib every day, but how they do it is always Guru Granth Sahib Ji's got a bigger palki, okay, and it's done Prakash of first, then Asadiwar Kirtan starts, and then during Asadiwar Kirtan and Prakash is done of Dasam Granth Sahib Ji, and the Hukamnam is taken afterwards. So even the Nihang Singhs will say that Guru Granth Sahib Ji is our Sir, and you got the two Modde, yeah, the two shoulders of Dasam Granth Sahib Ji and Sarablo Granth, yeah, the two shoulders. So the British recognized that a lot of our power comes from Dasam Bani, because that was created by our Guru to give us his martial spirit. It literally was the Granth of the Khalsa. It was given specifically to the Khalsa to make them strong. And when you read Chandi Diwar, it doesn't read like anything like Gurbani. Yeah, it's read in a very hard way. It's a battle. It's a movie of battle. Yeah, you're watching it and you're seeing what's going on, and we discuss half it on our channel. And it's interesting to read, just because you're literally watching like this invincible Chandi doing all these crazy things, and fighting, and it kind of inspires you to be like her. Yeah, invincible, fearless, and just roaring to go into battle. And a lot of other Baniya were like this, and they were actually full of Josh. We read some of that when we did this on the Guru Granth Sahib Ji section. We talked about Dasam Bani for a little bit. I don't know if you were here for that. But Shabas like Khanda Behandang, Kaldal Khandang, Atran Mandang, Barpandang. That's like quite a powerful thing to read, and it goes on like that. So Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj has given us this, and yes, what the British tried to do was to get that to become sort of ignored and not well read. So then when the standardization of that happened this way as well. So part of it was that, part of it, that was planned. That was, it wasn't like, like when you have like planned obsolescence, This was planned. The plan was to take the Sambani out, and yet retain some of the martial stuff. So they were kind of playing this two-faced game. They wanted to keep the Sikhs in the army to be martial, but at the same time they wanted to remove the majority of the ground. So it was scholarly questions that were asked. So people questioning this, questioning that. And when the question comes into someone's head, you see a shanka, a doubt, is a bit like a disease. It's like a virus. If you get a little bit of doubt, it spreads throughout your mind, and you think, I don't know about that. I might leave it alone. Yeah, stick to what I know. Stick to what I know. And holly, as they keep putting shanka in, then you end up with like none of that, and you're not touching it. You've got it. It's in your good car. It's available, but you just don't touch it anymore. Yeah, and this is one of the things that happened to the Sikhs. I mean, most people nowadays, if you tell them that Chandi Diwar is a story about Durga, they would be like, why would Guru Gobind Singh write that? Yeah. Then if you tell them that your Ardas comes from Chandi Diwar, you're like what? Like for the bit we read, Va Sri Bhagavati Ji ki Pashahi Dasmi, Pratham Bhagavati Simr ke. That's the very first part of Chandi Diwar. The first part of Chandi Diwar. That's the very first part. And we read it in Ardas in the Gurdwara every day. And Va Sri Bhagavati Ji ki means Chandi Diwar. That's the other word for it. Yeah. So we read it every day. We say Pashahi Dasmi, but it's not read. It's not well understood. So our philosophy kind of has suffered with that advent. There was a couple of committees that were done to work out what was Dasam Bani, what wasn't. Sodhna committees that were done at the end of the 18th century. And some Bani was taken out of Dasam Granth Sahib Ji. They said that, standardizing that one as well. And so some Banis do exist, but they're not in Dasam Granth Sahib, the standard version nowadays. Yet they are still available. And then obviously Sarablo Granth is not the Granth by itself. So for me, my advice would be read more about it. Yeah, there's a little bit of video now. There's another katha coming up I did recently in Wolverhampton we'll put that up, about the history of how it was collated. It's tempting to say, don't worry about it, because people are confused enough as it is. But that's almost rude, because obviously Maharaja is putting it in our Bani. We read Jab Sahib, that's the first bit of Dasam Granth Sahib Ji. We read Chaupe Sahib, that's the last bit of Charitra Pakyan, what people argue about most. Yeah, we read Svayye, that's from Akal Ustat. So the thing is, we should read, and especially the Banis like Jab Sahib, Akal Ustat, Chandi Diwar. These are Banis that are well accepted and read, and we should read them. Okay, but it was really meant for the Khalsa. So I put a little question mark there, that really the key thing for a Sikh is to understand who Guru is, what is Bani talking about, what is Japji Sahib saying, and then if we understand that and it appeals to us that we want to follow that path of enlightenment, then we can follow Sikhi more and more, and then naturally we'll want to read more of what our Gurus wrote for us, try to understand why they put this stuff. If we started off, like I know a mate of mine who's like a Trim Singh, he loves Dasam Bani, yeah? And I always say to him, bro, don't you think you should start by understanding Japji Sahib? He's like kind of putting it off. So in a way, the people that jump into that too much, it's not good for them, because Mara says Sant Sipahi. They could have said Sipahi Sant. They could have, innit? But they say Sant Sipahi. So the saintly soldier is our concept, yeah? It must be a Sant first in order to be worthy enough to hold a kirpan. Otherwise, you put the kirpan in somebody who's not a Sant, and 9 times out of 10, they're going to act in the wrong way. Yeah? So Sipahi first, then Sant. Yeah.
Is there a way, I was told that there's a way to read it though. Because if you read it in the wrong way, you could really go into some kind of dangerous path and all that kind of stuff.
All I've heard is don't read it at night time. Okay, so you should read it during the day. And if you are going to read it at night time, then you should read it all the way through the night. So it should be like a khand, like unbroken part until the morning. So that's one thing. The other way that a lot of people read Chand Diwar is end up reading it like Asa Diwar. They sort of sing it very nicely. And I did that, that's how I started reading it. And then I took Santhya from this Nihang Singh, and he was like, sounds great, your Santhya's fine, but you're missing out on the whole point of it. It's a battle story, read it like a battle's going on, yeah? Read it with a bit of Josh. And he just read it a little bit to me, and I was like, well, I was blown away. I was like, all this stuff I'll be reading, I'm getting a lot of getting the flavour of it, but because I was reading it, singing it like it was a nice song from Asa Diwar, I was getting the wrong feeling. So then I started reading it in that way, and it just became very powerful. Yeah, so it is a Jang Vidya. So we should learn how to read it as well. And unfortunately, that some of that Vidya is dying out. Some of that knowledge about how to read this Bani is dying out. Pav first, and Nipaji go.
Earlier on, you were saying that Guru Gobind Singh Ji made a statement that if anybody made like an altar to him at Hazur Sahib or changed to Harmandir Sahib, their family would be destroyed or whatever. And that's commonly said. But I wanted to know, is that actually written anywhere? Is there a written account? Where has that fact come from, or where has that statement come from? Because I've heard an alternative, which is the British spread that as a rumour because they were going to wipe out his family anyway, and all of his, and Dalip Singh, whatever they did. So it's a rumour spread by the British that Guru Gobind Singh Ji said that.
You got me there. From what I've read, I guess it's from more Kathawachis as well. So that might be a commonly accepted account. Obviously, the Pant Prakash and like Tawari Guru Khalsa would be a good place to start. Because this was these are people that wanted to sort of not speak for what the British were saying. So then like Ratan Singh Pangu, people like that, they've got ancestors going back, from Sukha Singh and Mehtab Singh. So Singh, can you shed some light on that?
The British did get rid of most of his family, but Dalip Singh, as you said, came over here, and then Dalip Singh had 3 children, but I don't think any of them had any children. So in that way, the family was sort of wiped out.
Is that a real?
I think so. I think maybe not.
And I've got a related statement to that. So you made the point about the Golden Temple being, or Harmandir Sahib, sorry, being auctioned, and there's a plaque. So there's 2 plaques. There's one in Gurbani and one in English, and I think they're placed on Darshan Duwari, like as you're coming through. And the British version puts a spin on it, saying that it was a blessing to say that Queen Victoria is the Empress of India, and it's a blessing come down from God. Whereas if you read the Gurbani version, it doesn't say anything about Queen Victoria. And those pictures, those images are available by GT1580 or whatever they're called.
That's why I put their thing up about them. You want to see the picture of that big? It's great research they've done. You know, I support them.
Their exhibition, and it's really interesting to see what the Gurbani actually says, the
The
Gurbani
Gurmukhi
version, and what the British version actually says.
Gurmukhi, yeah, not Gurbani. Yeah. So, well, you know, masters of PR. If you had learned PR from anybody, it's the British. You know, masters of it. They sold the Raj to us as they're trying to help us. And to this day, I remember having a big argument with one of the guys at my university. He was like an officer cadet at that time. We joined the guards anyway, and he was like, you know, well, we civilized you people. And I was so annoyed. Because, you know, there's accounts of British people coming to India and seeing, especially Punjab, seeing the wealth of the Punjabis. How wealthy they were, how well educated they were, women and men all very well educated, that the system, the Gurmukhi system was so good. Punjab now is well worse educated compared to what it was back then in Ranjit Singh's time. Sikhs were masters of education, you know. Education and Sikhi were like hand in hand. Everybody was literate because Gurbani was important to learn and read. Everybody was literate. And from a very young age, kids were taught how to learn Gurmukhi. By 4, 5 years old, they were taught. And there's many accounts of, you know, even British censuses of, you know, the literacy of the Sikhs at that time. And it's very high. So go on.
They were around Darbar side. They were called Bunge, which were like schools, but where they learned Gurmukhi and all the other Vidya. But the British destroyed those, so this is not there anymore.
GT58, I've seen the pictures of all these little kids that are 5, 6 with massive turbans sitting there all day studying, learning history. You know, because remember our history was memorized and it was all about getting stuff done. So they would learn history, they would have part competitions, Gurbani competitions, Kirtan, Rag Kirtan, everything that is a Sikh skill takes hours and hours of practice. So from a very young age, I've seen that Nihang Singhs when I went to Hazur Sahib. You know the parties are part, yeah? So somebody does katha and there's somebody sitting next to them reading the part out. There was normally the little kids, like 8, 10-year-olds that would be sitting there on the stage and just reading out things because they wouldn't understand it as much, but they could read it. And Santya Pakka Sigi by the time they were 10. And I've seen little kids that old reading Santya from not just from Suraj Prakash, not just Gurbani, but from, you know, from other texts as well. And nowadays, most of our kids, I would say, when they're 5, they go to Punjabi school and they are just bored to death by repeating again and again the same Uda, Eda, Idu, Uda. They should have learned that when they were 5, and they should be getting on to doing Path and Santya. Yeah? And thankfully there are groups that do that. Like in India you have like competitions for Path, and they still have like 5 to 7 Japji Sahib must be Kant, 7 to 9 Panjabaniya Kant. Yeah? There are 10 to 11 Sukhmani Sahib and Asadiwar Kant. And there's kids of 11 now. Like, there was that girl that came over recently on a Sikh channel, wasn't there? And she had like Bai Vara Kant, and she was only about whatever 10 or whatever 11. So memorization, by rote memorization as a young kid was just common. They just learned so many things off by heart and, you know, read it again and again and again. Because you might say, well, why were they doing that? You know, it's important to understand the meaning as well. The thing you got to remember is this, yeah? Who doesn't know the ABCD? Everybody knows the ABCD. Why? You sang it ages and ages, get memorize it, so it was ingrained into your brain. So if you have something ingrained, Bani is Gant, Maharaja says Paisa Gant. Paisa Gant means, you know, in the old days to carry money around in little pouches into their kapde, they used to tie a little bit of kapda, or in the kamar kasa, they used to tie money up. This is your wallet. So having Bani memorized is like having money in your wallet. You don't have to go to a cash machine to get money out. You can just spend it there and then. You're walking about, you want to do the part, it's in your head. You can do it straight away. Yeah? And that's so you would, and then later on you would get taught the philosophy and how to understand it, but you already had it memorized. So, Hanji. Oh, you had a question, Panji.
Yeah. Thank you. 2 questions. Firstly, Suraj Prakash, where did that come from? Who wrote that? And is there any translations for it? Because I can't seem to find any. And the second one, just coming back to Hazur Sahib. So during the period that you were talking about, so the late 18th century and the early 19th century, what happened with Hazur Sahib? They didn't seem to kind of go through that Gurdwara Reformation movement or come under control of any sort of GPC, as it were.
Suraj Prakash is written by Mahakavi Santokh Singh. He's a very sort of famous person amongst the Sikhs. He wrote Sri Guru Nanak Prakash, which is basically Suraj Prakash, isn't it? and then he in other Prakash, in another Granth. Now, with Mahakavi Santokh Singh, Mahakavi means a great poet. He's a very greedy person, very poor family, and then he ends up, after his wife was upset, he spent all these years doing this, research and writing. It's all in poetry, and then finally he got the patronage of the king. Under Ranjit Singh's Raj, he got a lot of patronage from the Maharajas, and he actually, he laughed one day. The story by him, very beautiful story, that they put a big matka of dud there, and in the morning he woke up, and he got the wrong matka to take into his bath. So he ended up having a bath with milk. And so he laughs to his wife. He goes, "Oh, din hunda siga, we didn't have money to buy milk for our kids. And look I stuck to writing Bani of history of our gurus, and look at me, I'm so blessed now, I'm having a bath in milk." Yeah. So it's Guru Sahib's kirpa. So that's Mahakavi Santokh Singh wrote it. And the Katha, the translation of it is available in Punjabi. Not many English translations. There are some things I know of that are trying to work on translating it into English. Yeah, he's written a lot of other Garav Ganjani Tika is his Tika of Japji Sahib. That's available online as well. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to learn Punjabi to read it in original Punjabi. I often will read English translations alongside reading the Punjabi translation and the Gurmukhi itself to work out my take on the whole thing, because sometimes you can't. You can't just go with what somebody else has written. There are all these D's and thous in there and stuff. Sometimes hard to understand that as well. About Hazur Sahib, my understanding from my limited history, and that's based upon, probably from talking to people rather than studying academically, is that the Nihang Singhs built up Harmandir Sahib. Obviously the grants were coming in from rich people and Ranjit Singh as well, but they built it up, and the Nihang Singhs basically ran it since then. Yeah, and in many ways they've got like a person in charge who's called a Pujari now, who's like the priest type person, and the Nihang Singhs still have their dairy around that area. But the way it grew was from patronage of other people, and the fact that Maharaj, in a way, Maharaj did say visit that place, but they didn't say make a massive monument to them. So people did visit it, and a lot of people go visit there. And there's now a straight train from Amritsar to Hazur Sahib, so you can go there. In terms of what was your point about how?
Just how they didn't really take on any sort of Gurdwara committee.
Well, they've got a Gurdwara organisation committee there. They've got like a system. They've got the Jahdar of the Takht, because it's a Takht as well, and they've got the Pujari, the main person who runs up the priestly side. Funny enough, he's celibate, yeah, so it's kind of like a slightly different. But in terms of the British influence didn't really happen there. The weapon keepers, the weapons, the kind of weapon makers, they're quite local. There's a lot of Maharashtrian Sikhs in that area. A lot of people converted to Sikhi in that area. So you get a lot of like non-Punjabi Sikhs. They do speak Punjabi, but it's like Hindi mix as well. So and the women will be slightly different. They'll be wearing saris, which most Punjabi women wouldn't wear. So the cultural practices are a bit more localized. But in terms of the Maryada, it's very much based, what you might say is, some people say, well, let's argue it's Puratan Maryada. It's lot less Christianized, a lot less anglicized. But of course.
In terms of influence, British influence, the Punjab was under direct British influence. Hazur Sahib, because a lot of rulers accepted British rule, like Maharaja Pyala, and Hazur Sahib was under, I think, a Muslim ruler. So that's why there wasn't that much influence on the area, because the ruler was in charge. The Sultan was in charge.
Yeah, so basically the British left it alone because he was in charge of the kingdom, and he'd agreed to work within the British system. So the British were like, they would give people limited autonomy, yeah, as long as they stayed within the system of not quelling our rebellions and paying their taxes and stuff. They didn't really want to. There were actually not that many British people in India. There was only about 1,000 or whatever, 2,000. There wasn't that many people there. So, Benji, you had a question.
I just wanted to ask, the Khanda as we see it today, was it actually formed, the symbol, was it formed during the...
There's a great website about the Khanda. I think Sandeep Singh Brar has done that work, because the same guy that made the Sikhs website, he's done the one called Sikh Museum, or Sikh, and it kind of goes to the history. From my understanding, reading his stuff, it's quite painstaking in detail he's gone into. It is a recent invention of the 19th century, not even of the 18th century. So we're talking 1920s, 1930s, when people were abroad and they were making letters, they were writing stuff, they were thinking of an emblem to put on there. And so you had the khanda going off with the kirpans going that way, sometimes kirpans going downwards. And over time, people adopted this one symbol and it became more popular. And then as it became more popular and people started to give it that understanding we've got now, the kada being the eternal thing and the khanda being the double-sized oars and two swords of miri piri. So it kind of grew, but it's not really a Puratan symbol. I talked about this last time, I'll come to it in a second. I talked about the Puratan flags of the Gurus. Whenever you look at the old flags of what the Gurus had, our Nishan Sahib would always have three things on it. It was the kirpan at the bottom, then you had the tal, which is like the shield, with the four dots. That would be like the handle from behind and quite good for smashing someone in the face as well. And also the qatar. You know what a qatar is? A qatar is like you have a bar here which you hold, and they have like kind of two things over here that protect your wrist and stuff, and you have a dagger coming out like a punch dagger, so you can actually punch with it, and it would have a little fat tip, so it would be like a pointy tip, and it would open up into a little like a bullet kind of thing, and then at the back of it would be the sharp part. So it was armor piercing. It was designed to make a small impact. All the force is concentrated upon one point, and then it expands out, and so you could get through chainmail, especially to thick cloth. And it was just straightforward. You could push it straight in with all your force of your shoulder. And the Gurus were quite fond of. That's not a Sikh weapon in the sense that it was invented by the Sikhs, but the Gurus were very fan of the qatar. Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji Maharaj, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, the qatar is always in their belt. So whenever you see the old pictures, you will see, if you look in the Kamar Kasa, you will always see the qatar coming out like two rods with a handle in the middle. Okay, and behind that is a qatar. So that was the original flag of the Sikhs, yeah. And in Barni you see Khadagaket. Khadagaket means that or Sri Astuj. Have you seen this word? So that's Sri Astuj or Astuj. It means that As means kirpan and Khadag means sword as well. And Tuja or Ket means your nishani or your flag. So your flag, your symbol is a sword. So God was always, the symbol of God is a sword for us, yeah. So that's why on our Nishan Sahib there's always a sword. Yeah. So there's always weapons on our Nishan Sahib. See? You're gonna have, Nishan Sahib always have to have a sword. And at the top of it you can have a tir or a khanda. Yeah? And then the flag itself has, nowadays got the khanda, but it's a recent invention. Okay, go on. Very good. No pressure.
I came across a book the other day. It's called Panch Prakash. Do you know what that is? I saw it in English though, in English translation.
There's Sri Guru Panth Prakash and there's Panth Prakash. There's two texts that have a very similar name. One is by Gyani Gyan Singh, and also the other one I think isn't Panth Prakash also the one that the grandson of Mehtab Singh wrote? Ratan Singh Pangu, didn't he write? But I think he wrote Panth Prakash as well. So there's two. So it depends on which one you had.
The thing is, I went to the bookshop in Southall and the guy says to me, the only authentic text in Sikhism is the Guru Granth Sahib. There's all these histories, but you can read them. And he goes, they're not.
That's what the Sikh Missionary Society would tell you. That's their official line. Because it's a missionary organization and they're all about Guru Granth Sahib Ji only. But that doesn't mean Dasam Granth Sahib Ji isn't authentic. That would be like saying that we don't know what Zafarnama is, we don't know what Jawab Sahib is. That's not true. Jawab Sahib is extremely authentic. Sikhs were reading it from Guru Gobind Singh Ji when they were 16 writing it, all the way up to when Amrit was made when Guru Gobind Singh was 33 years old. Yeah? And it was part of the Amrit ceremony. So that's not true. Guru Granth Sahib Ji is authentic, no doubt about it. But Dasam Granth Sahib Ji is also authentic scripture, and so is like Sarablo Granth. For me, I believe in all three Granths. People cast doubts upon Dasam Granth Sahib Ji when it comes to a lot of other Baniya. But in terms of the Baniya that people don't cast doubt upon, is like Jawab Sahib, Teti Svaiye, Akal Ustad, Zafarnama, these things, that Chu Kar Azama, there's the famous quote in the Menace, when all other means have failed, it's righteous to pick up the sword. These things people should be reading, they should be understanding them, because these are authentic texts from our Gurus, yeah? To say that sentence by that person is a bit naive. It's politically charged, that statement, It's trying to get... Okay, in history, well, Guru Gobind Singh is writing their history in Bachit Natak, yeah? So that's the history of Sikhi as well. But you're right, it's hard to say what happened at what moment. It's very hard to say, because sometimes the conversations that are being related by people, and I'll be honest with you, they're very emotionally charged. You know, it's great to hear. We don't know exactly that conversation is what took place. Yeah? It's people's bhavna, how they've written from their bhavna. It's also, so you might say that our history, our tradition of history, if you take the Western interpretation of history, then it's oral history is what we have. Sina Basina tradition is called. That from a chest to chest, like from your Sina to somebody else's. So you teach it to the person who you trust. So our tradition has always been Sina Basina. In the same way that Kirtan was taught. Ustad would teach somebody who they thought was worthy, and they would teach them up to the highest level to be as good as them, or even better, yeah? If you were proven worthy as a student. And the same way our history was taught that way, that people taught their history to their chosen students and the best ones. So we do have institutions in our Panth that can trace their lineage back to the Gurus. Damdami Taksal, for example, yeah? We talked about in Kirtan, Pai Avtar Singh. His family can trace back to Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji's time. That his father, and the next father, next father, all the way to Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji, they've been doing Kirtan. Yeah? So how can we doubt that person in their Kirtan tradition? You know? This must be the way that it sounded in the Guru's courts. So a lot of that tradition might be like some people might cast doubt upon it, but this is the way the history was passed on. And actually, overall, our texts are far more authentic than any other texts out there. Yeah? Because it's only been 300 years. You imagine now, I was reading today, I was watching a video, because I'm like that, I watched this video about this Muslim guy criticizing the doctrine of the Trinity, yeah, of the Christians. Now, he's giving 10 reasons why it isn't valid. And all of them are very strict, like scriptural reasons. The problem we have in with dealing with a text like the Quran or the Bible is they were compiled many, many years after the Gurus, after the kind of the Prophet. Bible 500 years. The doctrine of the Trinity was only really formalized about 400 years after Christ. There's no mention of it in the Bible itself. Yeah. So our tradition, our history is far more recent. If we start applying the standard of proof that we want today for documents upon documents that were for us for 300 years ago, you know, it'd be hard. But if we take the standard of proof that most of the world is working off for their own history from what was around 500 years ago, 600 years ago, then actually we're far better off. Yeah? So you've got to understand that as well.
One last point with that, with the being passed on orally. For example, in the Amritsar jar, you don't take a notebook in and write down all the dates the Panchmara give you.
Yeah.
It's because they've been given that, and if you're worthy enough in the future to do Panchmara Seva, you'll pass on that red that you've been given.
You probably get trained up as well for that.
Yeah, and they haven't written, anyway, it's not written the Bhatta needs to be Sarvalo or Khanda needs to be Sarvalo, stuff like that. That's been passed down. It's not that long, it's only a couple of generations.
Yeah, there's people that can trace a lineage back to Guru Gobind Singh Ji's time now. You know? It's just that unfortunately we out here in the West, we're kind of cut off from our roots, innit? Yeah, we're kind of like trees that are falling over in the wind. I remember in the morning in the park, I saw this tree just fall over. And it felt to me like it was reaching out because it had no patte left. And I was thinking how that tree must have felt when it fell over. Oh, that's the end. But we're like that tree now. We're falling over here and we're trying to have to sort of pull ourselves back, and hopefully there's still life inside the Sikh to start putting their roots down. Because where are we? We don't know what our Gurus did. We don't know what they said. A lot of us don't understand what Japji Sahib means. We don't know what Mool Mantar means. You know, go back to, we don't even know the names of 10 Gurus sometimes. Yeah? We don't know how they were related. And then what do we expect? If you got so much foundations missing, what do we expect from the Sikhs? Yeah? We don't expect the Sukha Singh and Mehtab Singhs of today. Two people to ride into Harmandir Sahib, and then one guy goes around the room like an efficient killing machine, the other guy takes out the head of Masaranga and comes back. Those things don't happen nowadays. So that's when we get inspired by one person, like, you know, somebody who just is just sitting there and starving, and it becomes a hero for us. Yeah? But we don't think the sovereign Khalsa way used to be sovereign, man. We find it hard to even understand what the Khalsa would do. The idea of the Sikhs setting up a criminal court to try those that were responsible, ourselves, and passing judgment seems so unusual to us. And yet Barack Obama and the Americans would do it like that. If something happened to them, they would try. We don't behave like a nation. We don't think like a nation. We don't think sovereign at all. Yeah? Because we've lost it. What do we expect then? We go into Gurdwara and we feel so unempowered to do anything, because we can't just stand up to these babbe and say you're doing wrong. You tell me what you understand. And they will fall off their chairs if they heard somebody who actually educated in Sikhi. I'm nobody in terms of Sikh philosophy. You've seen the people here know. But all we're trying to do is get the basics out there so people get a feeling for what happened. So when they stand up and somebody goes, oh, this is what happened this time, you can say, no, that's not what happened actually. Yeah? And the point is not to stop here. The point is to progress further and learn even more. Learn more by more history. On that note, Panjit gave me a point. The point is to stop talking. So we'll stop there. Babban's been standing there very patiently, so I'll do a little plug for him. There's t-shirts, the puzzle book and the Mool Mantar book if you want to know more for kids. Especially for the kids, there's that video we released 2 weeks ago, the Guru song. Do play it to your kids, yes? Sing it along with it. And to understand that the 12th Guru is, the eternal Guru is Guru Granth Sahib Ji and Guru Khalsa Panth Sahib Ji. But a little bit of history in there for each person to remember what the Gurus did. So, play that to your kids. Let's hope, Maharaja ki Kripa, let's hope that even though I am so kacha and my generation is so kachi, that the next generation we will do enough work in our generation to make sure that these kids that are coming up now know what Sikhi is, and then hopefully their kids will actually grow up to be the Khalsa that Guru Gobind Singh Ji wanted. I think it's about 40 years away to see the Khalsa. Yeah? If we do the work now, in 40 years, the world might say Waho Waho to the Khalsa. Yeah? At the moment, it's just like, yeah, alright, mate. Maybe, mate. Yeah? But Maharaja ki Kripa, in the future, the Khalsa Panth will be in Chardi Kala. And these doubts we have now about, is this the way for me? We will not be thinking that. We will be saying, give me the dotted line, I want to sign up. And not just us, the rest of the world will be signing up as well for the Fauj. Okay, finish off there. I'm sure I made loads of mistakes. I have, it's proven I made loads of mistakes. It's on camera, so please forgive me. And Benti to you guys, don't stop here, keep learning more. There's videos I've pointed to you guys there's much more to learn. So forgive me my mistakes. Let's finish off with Guru Sahib Jakara, not Jakara, Guru Sahib's Fateh, to say hopefully the Panth will be in Chardi Kala. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.